I'm half Chinese, half Italian. I was born in England. When I was born, my father contracted an illness called multiple sclerosis. The illness really affected his health pretty rapidly, and really my parents weren't able to look after me anymore. And I think I was probably somewhat of an accident anyway. I don't think my mum and dad really planned to have me at all at this time of their lives. And when I was 4, my dad had got so ill that they sent me away into China. I was sent to my grandparents, and I was raised in southern China in a place called Guangdong, which is a province. I was actually raised in a place called Guangzhou. And basically, my grandparents were going to raise me for about 8 years. My grandfather, he raised me in a very harsh way. He raised me on a bamboo cane, and whenever he would speak to me, he'd always hit me in my head with his cane. Well, I was only 4, and well, really, you don't question things when you're 4. I just pretty much felt I was naughty most of the time, and I just felt I wasn't liked at all. So I would never question anything. It hurt an awful lot, but I guess what hurt me more than the physical pain was really the emotional and the mental pain. I just really felt hated and naughty all the time. If my grandfather was going to teach me an important lesson, he'll always beat me around the sides of my face, and my ears would bleed frequently. He really wasn't a person to meddle with at all. My grandfather would do horrible things to me, like he'll rush into my bedroom in the early hours of the morning, like 2 or 3 in the morning, and he would wake me up with a bucket of water. He would throw this bucket of water over me, and as he charged into the room, and I'd wake up screaming for my life. I thought I was being killed. And if there's anything my grandfather couldn't tolerate, it'll be screaming or crying or whinging. And so he'll beat me all the more until I shut up. In those first days, he would beat me until he totally knocked me out. My grandmother would bring me around again, and it was really quite a horrific childhood that I had. I would eventually get up before him, and I'll get myself clothed, and we'd go into the stone courtyard. And my grandfather would teach me these very strange and weird exercises. And I had to copy everything that he did. My grandfather was a grand master in Kung Fu, and Kung Fu has been a tradition passed down through the generations in my family for over 500 years, from father to son and from father to son until it was passed down to me. And really my grandfather's goal in those 8 years while I was going to live with him was very much to pass on that tradition in the most effective way he could, so that one day I could pass it on to the next generation. All my cousins are all girls, and it's considered better luck to pass this down to a boy than to a girl. Very narrow-minded point of view. And because I was the only boy in a very large family, I guess I was the only option for them to teach. So perhaps that's why my grandfather was especially hard with me. The book's called Taming the Tiger, because he would teach me the movements of wild and exotic animals and insects, from tigers to monkeys to snakes to praying mantis. And we focused on the tiger style. We would actually study the movements of real animals as well, so I didn't really learn in a conventional sense. I didn't learn in a gym like you do in the Western world, where there's at least some degree of health and safety and child protection. I learned in the woods, and under extreme conditions where I was beaten day by day by day. Really, in those 8 years, my grandfather really just broke me in like nothing more than an animal. And although my story may seem interesting to you, for me, really, my childhood was nothing more than a nightmare. By the time I was 12, my mum and dad had saved enough money for me to live with them in the UK. So I was then put on a plane and sent back to England. I was living with them in a small council flat in North London, and it was so hard to settle into a normal family life. My mum was very ashamed of her background and her nationality, being Chinese, because her family had cut her off from marrying out of the Chinese community and marrying an Italian. And so she always spoke to me in English, and I guess I learned English pretty quickly. But all I could speak was Cantonese. And going to school was so hard because, of course, I came across many bullies at school, like you have everywhere in the world. And there was one boy in particular. He'd always be gunning for me all the time. He gave me a hard time, but I was so timid. You could do anything you wanted. You could thump me, call me horrible words, and I wouldn't do anything. I was taught not to. But this boy, one day, he just pushed me too far. He was calling my mum horrible swear words, and, well, I guess swear words are probably the first things you learn in a foreign language. And he just really upset me. And he was calling my mum these swear words. And, we were just two little kids in a playground pushing each other around. He thumped me in my shoulder and, well, I really beat him. I beat him so badly that I never had a single problem after that from anybody at school. It didn't matter if they were older than me or bigger than me. I think everybody became slightly more respectful of me and wary of me because of my ability. I was looked up to by many, and I guess because my grandfather wasn't looking over my shoulder, I began to abuse my ability. And I began to push my weight around a lot more than I had before this incident. And I began to pick on all the bullies at school. But I guess in doing so, I'm the one that ended up becoming the bully. And I'm so ashamed of that because I really think the bullies are nothing more than cowards. Really, as I grew older, my grandfather had an arrangement with the International Kung Fu Federation, an organization based in Switzerland and Geneva. They are one of many organizations around the world that are there to preserve the teachings of Kung Fu. And this organization, they sponsored me to continue training in London. And I was training in a school connected to the Shaolin Temple, UK. I was training under a person called Mr. Chang. And he was a really great guy. I was so young, but I was actually more advanced than he was. Because he was older than me, he mentored me and guided me, and I began to develop my own technique in Kung Fu. As I got older, they'll pay for me, this organization, to travel back to Asia, to China and Thailand and Pakistan, where I would enter many different competitions. Many of them were full contact, freestyle competitions, where there are really hardly any rules at all, and really anything. You could do anything in these fights, and so often people got very badly injured and from time to time even killed. But I never lost a single competition. And I was doing very well. Later, I entered the World Championships between 1987 and 1989, and I held the world title for 3 years in a row. Again, I don't really think much of these competitions because they're only for the younger students. They want to get a medal and make a name for themselves, get a trophy and what have you. Are you with me? And really, that's something which I wanted to do. There are so many grandmasters and advanced students that just never enter these competitions. They don't really need to prove themselves in any way at all. But for me, this was, something pretty impressive at the time. My grandfather, in his late 60s and early 70s, could quite easily handle about 10 of me. So really, it was a nonsense. But I began to work for this organization. I became one of their international instructors, and I would travel to schools teaching martial science around the world, and we would be observing the students and the teachers and making sure they're teaching Kung Fu to the highest level. I did this for a short while, until there was an opportunity for me to change my job in this company, and I worked for the security division. And what our organization would do is that we would run many training courses, run in conjunction with various other organizations, and we would train men and women how to become close protection bodyguards. So we would train people in the use of all sorts of weapons, everything from knives to guns, everything from counterterrorism to bomb disposal to languages, paramedicine, driving tactics, surveillance courses. There was no end to the courses we would run. My specialist field was hand-to-hand combat. That's all I would teach. I would train men and women fighting techniques they probably would not have learned in the army. I did this for a short while until there was a point where I was just getting a bit fed up of being stuck in a gym all day long. I was speaking to a friend of mine. He was an Indian chap. He was already a bodyguard, actually, and he's the guy that put the idea into my mind to become a bodyguard. He spoke about the money and the traveling, and well, it didn't take too much persuading before I got into the training courses myself, and I finally became one. In the very beginning, I was really quite thrilled to get my first assignment, but to be honest with you, I was so disappointed because I was just really working for a bunch of rich people that just had more money than sense. I was really nothing more than a fashion statement. I was their gopher getting their cigarettes and newspapers and a drink, and that's all I did. But I worked on a one-man assignment in Switzerland where I prevented a kidnapping from happening. It might sound impressive, but actually I didn't follow the protocol, I didn't follow the procedure. Nobody realized that, but I actually put the boy's life in further danger. But because I protected him and saved him, they actually gave me a promotion instead. And really, they moved me to work with high-profile clients. And in the end, I was working with diplomats. The main person I guided was a man called Amin, who was the Saudi Arabian ambassador in England, and I also worked with him in Italy and Cyprus, which is where my story will come to a conclusion this evening. And Amin, the Saudi Arabian ambassador in the UK, well, one of the big problems in guarding him was that he gambled. He gambled in casinos, and in the Middle East, he'll gamble on horse races and camel races. One day, he asked me to stop by his office at the end of my shift. I knocked on his door and he invited me in, and he just began to thank me for doing a good job for him. He then reached into his desk and he pulled out a wad of money and he gave this money to me, and he just began to thank me for doing a great job. It was quite common that he would give money gifts to other members of staff also. I thanked him courteously, but before I left his office, he asked me if I would do just a little favor for him. He told me about somebody that owed him a lot of money because of this gambling debt. Well, we were fully familiar with that person, but he just explained that this person was really not paying up the debt, and they were making him look like a fool. He wanted me to just go and pick up this money and deal with the situation and get it over and done with. It seems fair enough. He was just giving me a big gift, but he then also asked me to go a little bit further. He wanted me to rough this person up. He wanted me to make an example of them because he'd made such a fool of him. He wanted me to beat him up. This was really nothing I wanted to get involved with at all, and I turned him down. I was never raised to be this way, and I'm not saying I was necessarily a decent person, but I had a few principles at least. I turned him down, but I even offered him the money back, but he insisted that I kept that money, and we forgot that matter for the day. But I was going to change my mind in the months to come. We moved from the embassy in England to the embassy in Italy, where I was working in Rome there for a while. And that's where my life was going to go badly wrong. I had everything a person could probably aspire to at this point in my life. I was earning a lot of money as a bodyguard. And I had a great motorbike, a great home. I was traveling to many places, and it was enjoyable. The most important part of my life was my fiancée. I was engaged to a girl called Aya. She was from Sweden. And we'd been together for 3 years. And my childhood, as I said, for you it might be interesting. For me it was a nightmare. It was horrific. But now my life was absolutely fine. Everything was going so smoothly and so well. And we were together for 3 years, Aya and I. She was from Sweden, she was a law student, and we were so stupidly in love with each other, and we were going to get married. But when I was in Italy, she was in a friend's car in England, and she was killed in a car crash. And when I received the news of her death, I didn't handle it very well at all. I really got very depressed. And I just really wished I could have died with her. I just found myself just really hating my life, and I began to develop a hatred for other people. And my depression quickly turned into aggression. And I just remember myself, just that first occasion, exploding when somebody upset me in the smallest way. If somebody looked at me in a way that disagreed or said something out of place, I would be so twisted and spiteful. I would just provoke a fight immediately.